The reactable package is a fantastic tool to create interactive table within R. You know, these kind of tables where when you click on a column header, then the column sorts in ascending or descending order, or where you can click on things and the row expands, these sort of things. And with the reactable package, it's really easy to make such a table happen. In fact, I've created a really elaborate table with a whole lot of fancy stuff in it, and I will show you how to do all of that in a different video. In today's video, I'm going to show you the basics of reactable and how to get started with that. In case you don't know me, my name is Albert Rapp. I am a mathematician and data scientist, and on this channel, I help our users with typical data science tasks like wrapping your findings into a nice table to communicate that to stakeholders. So let's see how we can make that happen. In my code file, you can already see two code chunks. In the first code chunk, the one that is hidden here, I do nothing special really, but just compute a dataset called Hawaiian sales, which, as you can guess, shows you sales of something Hawaiian, in this case Hawaiian pizza, where the data comes from the GT package, which has a fake dataset called pizza place. These calculations here are not that important, so this is why I have hidden all of that stuff. And if you're interested in the code, you can find it on my blog. For now, let's just execute this code to see the data that we actually have that we want to make into our table. So here you can see that our data set shows us the amount of sales and the associated revenue that comes from selling Hawaiian pizza for every month of the year and also for every quarter of the year, which is kind of obvious. If you have the data for every month, you also know for which quarter you have what sales and revenue. Anyway, that's the data we want to use, and now let's try to make this into a table. Let's create a new code chunk for that, and then in there we can load the reactable package. This package is fantastic for creating interactive table, and that's exactly what we want to do here. So if we load that, then we have the functions from that package available to us. And now to create our first table, all we have to do is to use the reactable function, and inside of there use the Hawaiian sales dataset, and then the dataset is just taken as is and put into our table, and you can immediately see that the viewer window pops up and we do have a nice table, and by default it is even interactive, so you can see here that the data is split onto 2 pages, so there you can see only 10 rows at a time, and also the columns are sortable by default. So reactable gives you a bit of interactivity even from the start. You can tweak a whole lot of interactivity, and we'll do a bit of that, but even from the start, you do have basic features like pagination and sorting. But before we do more interactive stuff, let us make our table a little bit nicer. Let's just make a little bit of room here, because all of the things that we want to tweak in our table have to happen inside of the reactable function. If you look at the documentation of this function, you see that it has a whole bunch of arguments, and you have to throw in all of the things that you want to change into these arguments here. That's a bit different than other packages like GT or Flex table, where you can just type things together. And then instead of having one function command with a whole lot of arguments, you have a chain of different commands that all do something very specific. So that's a bit of a different style, but it doesn't matter too much. We can still make things work. And the first thing we want to change is the columns. Namely, I do want to have nicer column names by using title case in the names. And for that, as I said, we need to use the columns argument. And in there, we need to pass in a list of specifications for each column in our data set. So for the month column, what we could do is to give a column specification or a column definition using the call_def helper function. And in there, we can specify a name, and let's call this month. So now you can see that this name is taken as is, and I do have my title case for this particular column. Now clearly we can do the exact same thing for the other columns, so let's specify the same thing for the quarter, the sales, and the revenue columns. And now if we execute this, we can see that everything became title case. So now that we have that, let us throw in a title and subtitle for our table so that everyone knows what this data is about. Unfortunately, the reactable package doesn't allow you to do titles and subtitles on its own. What you could do is to do a little bit of HTML and CSS magic to create a container that has the table, and above that there are texts like the title and subtitle. But that's way too complicated for a short little intro that we want to do here. So we're going to throw in another reactable package that has this additional functionality. And this package is the reactable formatter package. So instead of library reactable, we have reactable formatter. And with this package, we can just take our reactable package or our reactable table, and then we pass this to the add title function. And in there, we can specify things like adding a title, and then we do get a title. And if we want to add a subtitle, then we don't have to do anything much different. All we have to do is to use, instead of the add title function, we have to use the add subtitle function. So let's pipe this into this function. And in there, we specify a subtitle. And then we have a subtitle, which by default is bold, which I do not want. So that's why I do throw in a font weight and set it to normal. All right, all good. We have a nice title and we have a subtitle. Everyone knows what this data is about now. Now let's do a bit of formatting. And one particular thing I want to do is to talk about the revenue column here, because these are clearly numbers that are dollar amounts. And they don't really look like that right now in the table. So that's why we have to throw in a little bit of formatting for this particular column. And this is where we can use arguments from the column definition function, which there are many of. And one particular argument that you might think will help for our formatting issues is the formatting argument. And if you look into the documentation, if you scroll down, you see here that, well, this is about column formatting options, and we do have a col format helper function that will give us what we need. And if we click into that, we do see here that col format has another whole lot of specifications that we can throw in. And one of those is currency, and currency can be specified to USD, like US dollar. So I guess we only have to throw in these things together in the revenue column definition. So let's make some room. And then we notice that the format argument is the one that we need. And in there we can use the col format helper function. And in there we can set the currency to true. And if we do that, doesn't really work, because clearly we don't want to have true here. That's not a good thing to do. We want to have USD, like US dollars, in here, just like documentation said. I don't know where I came up with this true just now. In any case, now we do have nice dollar amounts inside of our table here. So that's how you can add in a little bit of formatting for all of your columns. All you have to do is to specify the format argument and use the column format function, which has a whole lot of things that you can do to make your things look nice. So if you look at all of the things here, then you can make things into date time or dates or just times. And I guess this is where I got the true and false thing from here, because for date times and date, you just have to flip the switch to true, and then things are formatted like that. So that's a really easy way to do basic formatting. There's a whole lot of other things you could do, but for the quick and easy things, the col format helper function is your help guide. So now if we look at our table again, we do see that it looks nice, but now I do want to group things by quarter. Right now, the quarter column isn't particularly useful because it just repeats itself. I do want to have a nice structure where the things that belong to the same quarter are grouped together. And for that, if we look into the reactable function, there is an argument called group by. And if we look into the documentation down here, it says a character vector of column names to group by. So I guess to group by the quarter column, all we have to do is to throw in the quarter name in here, and then things are grouped nicely. And it's even interactive, so we can unfold things as needed. This is a great way to structure your table. If you have a whole lot of information, a really long detailed table, then grouping might just be the thing that you want to have for your table, so that everything is nicely interactive. And then the reader of the table can just drill into the table and focus on what he wants to see. But now the grouped things are kind of uninformative if they are all just folded. It would be neat if we had the amount of sales and the amount of revenue in that particular quarter if we look at, for example, quarter one. So it would be nice to not only have these numbers here, but also a sum for the group header basically, or for the group row. And to make that happen, we can jump into the column specification of sales and revenue again. So let's go into the column definition here for revenue. And in there you see that there's an argument called aggregate. And if you look into this, it is an aggregate function to use when rows are grouped, just like we have right now. So that's our go-to thing. And you can immediately see that you can use one of the built-in functions, or if you need to have something custom, you will need to do a little bit of JavaScript using the JavaScript function. But here we only want to do a little bit of adding up numbers. So let's just go with sum here. So let's specify aggregate should be sum. And we do want to do the same thing for the sales column. So in there, we also do aggregate and set it to sum. And now we have exactly what we want. We do have the sum of the sales and we do have the sum of the revenue for each quarter. But of course, we can still drill into this to see everything month by month. So as you can see, you can specify a whole lot of stuff inside of the column definition function. And just to illustrate this some more, let's do also something with the quarter column. So let's just make some room here. And then we can look into this function here and we see that, okay, there is an argument called filterable or searchable. Let's see what they can do here. And here we could see that, okay, we can use column filtering with enabling the filterable argument. So that's why, just to demonstrate that we can throw in more interactive stuff, let's set filterable to true. And that way, if we want to look for a particular month and we don't know in which quarter it is, then we just say, okay, I'm looking for April and things are sorted. Well, things are sorted, but I meant to say filtered. And now we do see here that there is April in there. Let's see if we want to have all the months that have an A in them, we could just type an A and then we see the things that we want to see here. The nice thing about this is that out of the box, this thing here, let's just look for January. You do see here that in the group heading, everything is also filtered. So right now the sum of the sales for quarter one is just the sum of this one number, basically January. So that's kind of neat that these rows are interactive as well. And this works quite nicely. But where this doesn't work as nicely is if you put things into the footer. To demonstrate this, let's just do a sum of all of the things that we have in the sales and in the revenue column so that we have a total for the whole year. And to do that, we have to just go into, for example, the sales column definition. And in there, we have to look for something that's called footer. And the footer wants to have either some hard-coded content or a render function that calculates something for you. It can be an R function that takes the column values and column names as argument, or a JavaScript function that takes the column object and table state object as arguments. For now, let's just think about this R function. We can always write an R function. We don't need to worry about JavaScript for now. So in the sales, let's set the footer to a function. And the documentation said it needs to be values. The first argument is values and the other one is names. So it needs to be a 2-argument function. And now that we have that, all we want to do is to have the sum of all the values that are in that particular column. So let's just throw in the sum of values. And now we do see here that we have a footer for the sales column that just sums up all of the values here. But now if you filter this for January, for example, then you see here that the row group headers, they are filtered, they do update depending on the input we have, but this thing doesn't update. And the reason why this doesn't update is because we have specified an R function here. An R function is always just executed once at the beginning and then never touched again. With JavaScript function, they are just embedded into this little viewer window that you see here, into the website basically. And then they are always triggered whenever the underlying data set changes. So to demonstrate this, let us first make sure that our revenue column also has this footer. So that's nice. But unfortunately, this doesn't show dollar amounts. So we do need to check out if there's something we can do about the footer. And if we scroll down here, we do see here that there's a footer style as well. But this really is only related to style in terms of like font, color, and so on. So this doesn't seem to help us. So I guess we will just embed the output format into our R function. So inside of our R function, let's just throw this to the scales package where we do have the dollar function, and this will turn any number that we pass to it into something that looks like a dollar amount. And now if we execute this, we do see here that we do have a nice dollar amount here. Actually, this does even look nicer because it adds a comma in there, but we can fix that and make it equal by checking out whether the col format function has something in there for us. And there's separators as an argument, and that is set to false. So let's just set this to true. And then if we execute this, things look exactly equal for the footer as well as for the cells. Anyway, we're still left with the problem that, well, things don't really update here. So that's why we are forced to replace our R function with JavaScript functions. And don't be alarmed if you cannot do any JavaScript. I'm not an expert in that either. But the nice thing is really with the reactable package, there's a really nice cookbook of typical things that you might want to do. So you can use this as a template, and then you don't need to write most of JavaScript. So let's head into this cookbook, and on the reactable documentation website, you can head into demos, and then there's the demo cookbook. And then if you look through the examples, you see here that there's a total rows, and in there you see that, okay, in this example here, there seems to be just an R function that does the total amount of thing. But if you look down, you see that there is dynamic totals, and this here already has JavaScript code for you. So you can just take this as is and throw this into your footer argument. So let's just throw this in here and throw this in there. And now if we execute this, we have the exact same output as before, which is kind of neat. And then if we filter for January, then you see that everything works out nicely. But I do see that I have made a mistake of turning this part here into currency as well. And the reason for that is because here we turn what we return, we turn it to the currency style thing. So that's why let's just get rid of this part here. And now if we execute this, things look like a number again. And if we filter for January, then we do see here that things work out nicely. So this cookbook is a fantastic resource, and I use it all the time whenever I want to do something tricky with Reactable. And I recommend that you check that out too. And now I want to focus a little bit on the thing we have inserted here, even though we didn't even have to do much of the tweaking. It helps to understand what the idea behind this stuff is here. So really, if you look into the column definition function again and look into the footer, so if you scroll all the way down to the footer, we have seen that just like our R function was specified in the sense that it needs to take the column values and the names as arguments, the JavaScript function needs to take a column object and a table state object as argument. So this is why our JavaScript function, which in JavaScript is defined very similarly to how we write things in R, it has two arguments called column and state. And then what happens is that first the variable that's 0 is defined, and then this part here, it goes through every row and adds what is inside of that particular column on top of the variable that we've called total. And it does this using a for each loop basically, and then it returns the total amount after having looped through all of these things. And the important thing why this works is because this is JavaScript and it knows the state of the table, which means that it knows when things are filtered. So that's why whenever we filter something, whenever we type in something into this window here, it updates the state. And from this state, we can get the sorted data and then loop through that by applying a function at every step of the way. And looping through this data means looping through the rows. So this is why our function that we apply takes something that we call row as an argument, and then we just add whatever is in that row, in particular in the correct column that we want to target, which comes from the outer function argument, and then adds that to the total, and then we return the total. Again, this is not a JavaScript crash course here, but I do want to help you adjust or understand these things a little bit so that you can adjust this to your use case when you need to. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to do a whole lot more to work with Reactable than go into the cookbook, find something that looks similar to what you need, and then tweak a little bit, and try to make sense of the JavaScript code if that is necessary that the cookbook gives you. Anyway, I am digressing. Let's just focus on our table again. And one thing that is bothering me here is that by default, all of these quarters are folded. And if we want to change that, we can look at reactable again. I always try to look into this reactable function when I do want to change something globally for the table and not for some particular column, and see if there's something we can do. And if we scroll through here, it seems that default expanded is set to false, and this sounds like something that if we set it to true, will not fold the columns, not really the columns, but the rows. And now if we do that, it did exactly what we want. We can still toggle and untoggle these things, but by default, we do have it expanded, which is kind of nice. Okay, so one final thing that I want to change here is the styling of this table. I do want to put in a little bit of visual structure by styling the group headers, basically, these group rows, by making them a different color. And to do so, my initial idea is to go into reactable and check out if there's something we can use here. And there's something called theme. And if we look into the documentation, let's see what theme expects of us. It takes something that can be assembled by the reactable theme function. All right, that's cool. And in there we do see a whole bunch of arguments, and one of them is row group style. So this might be something that we can set to some particular instruction, and then the group headings of my group input will be styled differently. Let's check what we need here. We do need row group style is CSS for row groups. Okay, so CSS is a bit of stuff from HTML and CSS, so from the web development world. I do have a video series on that if you're more interested in that, but if you don't know anything about this, I do think you can follow along just fine. It's not that complicated. It's just a bit of instructing things like background color is set to something. So with that said, let's throw in the theme argument into my reactable table, but I'm not putting it in the right position. It needs to go down here, otherwise it's in the column definition. And then we can set this to reactable theme. And in there we want to change the row group style. And it says we need to put in CSS style in there. And the easiest way to do that in R is to use the CSS function from HTML tools. And in there you can just throw in CSS attributes and set them to particular values. For example, we can set the background to a particular color, and the left border of the rows can be a 2 pixel wide solid line with a particular color. And this one is a kind of dark bluish, so a bit darker than this. And if we execute this, then we do see here that we did make an effect, but unfortunately all the cells were styled. So this only got us halfway there, so let's try to figure out how to change that. And for that, I will look into the cookbook again. And if I look through the table here, it says style nested rows, which sounds exactly like what I want to do. And here, somehow the code did exactly what we want to do. It styled the things that are in the folds. It styled them differently than the group. We want to do it in an inverse order, but let's just look at the code and then maybe we can tweak this. So here we see that the row style inside of reactable, it was set to a JavaScript function that as an argument has something called row info, and then it checks if this row info, the level of that is larger than 0. It has this styling here where it seems to put in a border left, so row level greater than 0 seems to correspond to this thing that was styled here with the orange line at the left border, and everything else will just have a transparent left border, I guess. So this must mean that level 0 corresponds to the row group headings. So I guess we can just take this code here and tweak it a little bit so that it targets only the thing with the row group level 1 or the row info level. So let's take this, add back to R, and then instead of the theme here, let's just throw in this code. Now if we execute this, well, we get the result that we've just seen, so the code works fine. And now let's get rid of this part here because this transparent line doesn't do anything. I'd moved it a little bit, but I don't really mind that the quarter thing moved a little bit. See, if I put this back, then the things that were in the quarter column, it moved, but I don't mind that. So let's just get rid of this. This makes our JavaScript easier and we want to keep the JavaScript code as small as possible. And now let's target the things that are 0. In JavaScript, you can easily Google that. You can do that just like in R with 2 equal signs. There's also a thing with 3 equal signs. It will check for really true equality without doing any type conversions, but let's forget about this for now. Let's just go with this and see if this just works. And if not, we can worry about how to fix this. So now if we execute this, we do see here that we have flipped and the style changed. So that's cool. And we look at this part here seems to be only a bunch of CSS instructions using camel case. So it's always a new word. Something that in CSS would be border minus left is here border and then left with a capital L here. So that's camel case. So that way we could just throw more CSS instructions in here as a list. That's not really anything we have to learn. It's just figuring out what's the CSS instruction by Googling or asking ChatGPT to do what I want and then throwing this in there. So here all we have to do is to change the background color to the color that we originally wanted. That's this color right here. Then we have our light bluish background color. And then we do the same thing for this 2 pixel solid line. And then we have a dark blue left border. That's really cool. Another example of where we just had to take what the cookbook gives us and then tweak it a little bit to what we want to do. But I do feel a little bit bad that the simple CSS instructions that we've tried before didn't work. So let's just throw in a little bit of CSS instructions where this simple way works without having to do JavaScript. Let's just make sure that these things here at the bottom are bold. And for that, we can go into our column definition again. And in there, we do see here that there's a footer style. We have already learned about this earlier. So let's just set the footer style, and in there we can use the CSS function again. And then let's just set the font weight to 600, which is bold. And then things are bold here. We could even go for 700. Doesn't make much of a difference. So let's go with 600. And then let's throw the exact same style into here as well. And now we have bold style. So with that, we have created a nice little interactive table where we can fold or unfold things and we can filter stuff. So that's neat. And with that, I have shown you everything I wanted to show you in this video. If you enjoyed this video, then I'm sure you're also going to like my email newsletter where every week I show how to do this kind of thing in R. For example, a very similar table is something I have demonstrated just last week in the email newsletter, and every week there is something similar like this. So if you're interested in that, you can follow this link here, or if you want to learn more about this HTML and CSS thing that we have used for Reactable every now and then, you can check out my web development for R video series. So now, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video.